Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, bringing you the greatest recordings ever. And today, we're taking on one of the iconic monuments of the 19th century orchestral repertoire, Schubert's Great C Major Symphony, Symphony number 9, or sometimes it's called number 8, but it's the Great C Major, and it has a Deutsch number. I mean, it's Deutsch number, I don't know what the Deutsch number is, who cares? It's the Great C Major Symphony, the Great. That's how you know. Anyway, most people still consider it to be Symphony number 9, even though there is no number 7, but yeah, okay. So, yeah, which recording is it? Well, that's the thing. Throughout history, all of recorded history, there have been two that usually get the palm. There's George Sell with the Cleveland Orchestra, which actually did twice. But the first one, the Sony one, on the Columbia, is the one that usually gets the most attention. And then Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony, where they just go nuts over it. It sounds like Berlioz. It's amazing. It's such an incredible piece, but it probably has more bad recordings than almost any other major orchestral work. It's very, very difficult to bring off. In like real life, I've seen it performed dozens of times. I mean, it almost always fails. It really is extraordinarily difficult. There's the question of how do you do the repeats? How many repeats are you supposed to have? Hint, as few as possible. Usually, okay, you could do the one in the first movement, the one in the finale sometimes, never in the scherzo, which makes it like the longest movement in the whole symphony, which is like totally crazy. No, you don't want to do that. Then there's just the fact that it's exhausting. It's full of teeny tiny repetitious motives. Like in the first movement, it's going doom ba-doom 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 like this. It's very hard to do that for 15 or 20 minutes. It's particularly ungrateful for the strings, who have in the finale to do that which they have about 50 billion trillion zillion times. In fact, when it was first performed, the orchestra wouldn't play it because they thought it was silly and insulting and ridiculous. And it was a total disaster. So, I mean, it wasn't until years and years later that people started to do it. So, yeah, it's enormously challenging. And so great recordings tend to be rather few and far between. And some of them come from places you might not expect. I mean, for example, there is no great recording. I mean, well, there are a couple good ones, but I mean, among the greatest, none of them feature the Vienna Philharmonic, which is kind of fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you would really think that of all the orchestras that could play Schubert, the Vienna Philharmonic would be like the Schubert thing. But no, they're not. And so, the great ones were Zell in Cleveland and Munch in Boston. And there's one other, and that's this one. Josef Krips with the London Symphony Orchestra on Decca. Yeah, this is marvelous. Now, Krips was one of those echt Viennese conductors. He was great in Mozart. He was great in this was his thing. The London Symphony, however, at this time, which was like 1958 or something, when was this Krips box? Let's take a look at it. The London Symphony at this period, here it is, Schubert, the Great C Major, in the original jacket. Let me find the original jacket. There it is. Look at that. Isn't that lovely, the original jacket? It was recorded in, 58. Wow. And the London Symphony in 1958 was a really crappy orchestra for the most part. I mean, they really needed to be whipped into shape, and Krips was not a whipper. Remember, you may recall he did a somewhat Beethoven cycle that was on Everest, I think, from exactly this period. He could be very good or just bland and uninteresting. And here he was at his absolute best, and he galvanized these people to play this work. There's sometimes, tiny details make a big, big difference. And this is one of those symphonies where tiny details can, because like I said, it's all based on repetition and, So in the accompaniment to the third subject, there are three main themes in the first movement of the symphony. The first is the one that goes yum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum, right? That's that one. Then there's this ostinato. Chunk, 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 right? And the woodwinds have the second subject. Yum bum 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 da 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 da. It does that thing. Then it goes off on this detour to the third subject on unison trombones, which is an amazing thing for this period, for the 18 teens and 20s. And, it's da, 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 da. But under that is the same ostinato that accompanies the second subject, that chunk, 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 chunk. And they're little pizzicatos. Plunk, 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 plunk. Well, okay. All of that is a very long way of saying I was first entranced by this performance because you could hear those pizzicatos on the violins. Plunk, 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 plunk. Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, first of all, something I hadn't heard before, the piece, which I knew pretty well. And second of all, it just somehow made the passage. It created layers of color. I mean, it was kind of amazing. It's just one of those tiny things, but the whole performance is on that level. That's my point. That's just one example of many where you can really, really hear how the conductor and the orchestra are just reveling in the opportunities that Schubert gives them to create just a deep, rich, multifaceted web of sound. Oh, it's gorgeous. And this is just fabulous as a result. I mean, the tempos are all wonderful. I mean, it's just sprightly and fresh and young, and it has Viennese Gemütlichkeit and Schwung and all those, German things and Sachertorts and stuff like that, and Schlag, and, it's just lovely. An absolutely fabulous performance that you may not know so well. And that's why I've included it in this series of the greatest recordings ever. So keep on listening, friends, and thanks for joining me. Take care.